The email arrived at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday. I was awake because I am always awake at that hour now, sitting in the study of a rental apartment smaller than the garage I used to own. The subject line read, "Urgent. Patent assignment required for Series C." The sender was a lawyer I had never heard of, representing a company called Helix Dynamic Systems. 3 paragraphs down, buried in the corporate language, was the name Marcus Webb, my former best friend, my former business partner, the man who had taken everything. He needed something from me. After 6 years of silence, after the depositions and settlements and the careful destruction of everything I had built, Marcus needed my signature on a document that would transfer ownership of Patent US10294756B2, the one asset he had somehow missed when he stripped the company down to studs, the one thing I had quietly kept safe because I knew, even then, that men like Marcus always come back for more. I read the email 3 times. Then I made coffee and sat watching the window turn gray with dawn. My hands no longer shake the way they did in those first months after the collapse. I had learned to hold a mug without rattling the ceramic, to sign my name without the pen skipping. Small victories that cost more than most people understand. I am 44 years old, and I have become a man who measures progress in steadiness, in the ability to sit still and think clearly while the world assumes I have been broken. The apartment is efficient. 1 bedroom, a galley kitchen, a study with a single window overlooking a parking lot. I keep it clean because order is a form of power when you have little else. The furniture came with the lease. I own almost nothing now except clothes, a laptop, and 3 filing boxes containing documents I pulled from storage before Marcus could reach them. Those boxes live in my closet behind a luggage case I have never used. Every morning I walk 2 miles through the neighborhood, past houses I used to envy and now regard with mild curiosity. I do not listen to music while I walk. I think. I plan. I watch people leave for work and return with groceries, and I remember what it felt like to believe that stability was permanent. Marcus and I met in graduate school. He was the kind of bright, restless mind that pulled people into orbit. I was quieter, more methodical, better with systems than personalities. We complemented each other. Or so I told myself for 15 years. We started the company in his garage with $12,000, half from each of us, and a single patent application I had drafted during my thesis work. The technology was simple in concept, complex in execution, a distributed authentication protocol that eliminated single points of failure in network security. It mattered. It still matters. For the first 5 years, we worked 18-hour days and split decisions 50-50. We hired carefully. We grew slowly. Marcus handled investors and partnerships while I managed engineering and product architecture. His wife, Sarah, tolerated the chaos. My own marriage did not survive it, but I had made peace with that. The work felt important. The fault lines began so quietly that I mistook them for stress. Marcus started traveling more, closing deals I only heard about in retrospective summaries. Board meetings became formalities where I learned about decisions already made. When I raised questions, Marcus smiled with the patience you show a child and said, "Trust me, this is how it scales." I trusted him because I had always trusted him, because trust, I had learned too late, is the weapon betrayal requires. The inciting act happened on a Thursday in March. I arrived at the office to find the locks changed. Security met me in the lobby with a printed letter on company stationery, signed by Marcus as sole CEO, informing me that I was no longer employed and that my equity had been forfeited due to breach of fiduciary duty. The breach was fabricated, documented in emails I had never written, meeting notes I had never seen, and testimony from 2 employees I barely knew who swore under oath that I had attempted to sell trade secrets to competitors. Marcus had prepared this for months. Every signature, every witness, every legal trap had been set with the kind of meticulous care I once admired in him. I stood in that lobby holding a cardboard box they had packed for me and felt something in my chest go silent. Not rage, not grief. Silence. I walked to my car, drove home, and began reading documents. The inquiry took 3 months of 16-hour days. I rebuilt timelines from bank statements, calendar exports, and message logs I had archived out of habit. The first week, I simply organized. I created spreadsheets tracking every financial transaction the company had made in the 2 years before my termination. I cross-referenced expense reports with calendar entries. I printed emails and taped them to the walls of my apartment in chronological sequence, looking for patterns in the gaps. The pattern emerged slowly. Marcus had begun routing decisions through side channels 8 months before he terminated me. Emails that should have included me were sent to subsets of the team. Meeting invites were modified after I accepted them, changing locations or times without notification. Small administrative failures that I had attributed to growth and chaos were, I realized, deliberately designed to isolate me from information. I called former colleagues who would still speak to me and asked careful questions that never revealed what I already knew. Most were cautious, their voices tight with the fear of association, but a few were angry. One engineer, a woman named Priya, who had reported to me for 3 years, met me at a park and handed me a thumb drive. "He made us sign NDAs," she said, "but this is my personal archive. I kept copies because something felt wrong." The drive contained internal memos Marcus had written to the board, none of which I had ever seen. In them, he described me as erratic, unstable, and increasingly paranoid about competitors. He cited meetings where I had allegedly made inappropriate comments about selling data. The meetings were real. The comments were not. Priya had been in 2 of those meetings and swore under oath later that nothing I said matched Marcus's descriptions. I hired a lawyer with the last of my savings, a sharp woman named Diane Park who had built her practice on breach of contract cases and did not flinch when I showed her the evidence. She sat in my apartment for 6 hours reviewing documents, making notes in a leather-bound journal, asking questions that peeled back layers I had not considered. "He is good," she said finally, "but he got lazy in 2 places." The emails Marcus used to frame me were sophisticated forgeries, but they contained metadata inconsistencies that a forensic audit could expose. The timestamps showed messages sent from my account while my phone records proved I was in another state. The IP addresses traced to a server farm Marcus had contracted for load testing, a detail that would require expert testimony but was verifiable. The board meeting minutes he cited were signed by investors who confirmed, when subpoenaed, that they had never attended those meetings. One investor, a venture partner named Richard Liu, sent me an affidavit stating plainly that he had never signed the document bearing his name. The signature, he noted, was close, but missed the particular flourish he always used on legal documents. The employees who testified against me had both received unusual bonuses the week before their depositions. The bonuses were structured as retention payments, but the timing was obvious once you saw it. Diane filed motions to compel their financial records. Both employees recanted their testimony within a month. Piece by piece, I documented the architecture of his theft. But documentation is not justice. Documentation is only preparation. But documentation is not victory. Diane told me plainly that litigation would take years and cost more than I could afford. Marcus had positioned himself well. He controlled the company, the investors, the narrative. Even if I won, she said, I would lose. So I made a different choice. The patent US10294756B2 had been filed under my name alone during the thesis stage, before Marcus and I formalized our partnership. When we incorporated, I'd assigned it to the company through an agreement that included a reversion clause if I left the company under specific conditions. Marcus had overlooked this clause because it was buried in 30 pages of standard boilerplate that lawyers sign without reading. The clause stated that if I were terminated without cause, the patent reverted to me personally. Marcus believed he had terminated me with cause, but the fabricated evidence would not survive scrutiny, and the reversion triggered the moment I left the building. I filed the reversion notice with the patent office quietly, through a shell entity I created with Diane's help. No announcements, no press releases, just paperwork processed in silence while Marcus celebrated his victory with investors who did not yet realize what they had lost. Then I waited. The company Marcus now controlled was built on my patent. Every licensing deal, every product deployment, every partnership agreement assumed ownership that had quietly evaporated. I knew he would not notice immediately. Men who steal become sloppy about what they already possess. They stop checking the foundations because they believe conquest equals ownership. I found work as a contract engineer at a fraction of my old salary. The job was at a mid-sized logistics firm that needed someone to audit their data pipelines. The work was straightforward, almost boring, and I welcomed the monotony. I sat in a cubicle under fluorescent lights and wrote documentation for systems I could map in my sleep. My coworkers were pleasant and incurious. No one asked about my previous work. No one recognized my name. I moved into the apartment on a Saturday in August. The previous tenant had left behind a kitchen table and a floor lamp with a bent shade. I kept both. I bought a bed, a desk, and 2 chairs from a discount furniture store that delivered everything in flat boxes. I assembled the pieces alone, following instructions printed in 4 languages, tightening screws with the small wrench provided. The apartment became a kind of monastery. I developed rituals that structured the emptiness. I woke at 5 and made coffee in a French press I had owned since graduate school. I walked 2 miles through the neighborhood, past houses I used to envy and now regarded with mild curiosity. I returned, showered, and ate breakfast at the kitchen table while reading technical journals. I worked 8 hours. I came home, cooked simple meals, read, and slept. On weekends, I went to the library and read case law. I learned the mechanics of patent reversions, licensing disputes, and corporate governance failures. I studied how companies collapsed under the weight of ownership ambiguities. I took notes in a composition book, not because I needed to remember, but because the act of writing clarified my thinking. I paid rent and utilities and ate simply and put every spare dollar into a savings account for legal fees I hoped I would never need. The account grew slowly. $1,500, $3,000, $5,000. I tracked the balance in a spreadsheet alongside projections for how long I could sustain litigation if Marcus discovered the patent reversion and chose to fight. I lived like a man in exile, visible but unseen, while Marcus expanded the company into new markets and raised 2 more rounds of funding. I watched from a distance, reading press releases and trade journal articles that celebrated his vision and leadership. Each article felt like a knife drawn slowly across skin, not deep enough to kill, but persistent enough to scar. But I did not bleed. I archived every article in a folder on my laptop, building a record of his claims and promises. Someday, I thought, these will matter. Someday, the gap between what he says he built and what he actually owns will become visible to people who control his future. I was in no rush. Patience, I had learned, is the only advantage available to men who have already lost everything. The complications arrived in year 3. Marcus sold the company to a larger firm for $42 million. I learned about it from a news article that featured his photograph, smiling in front of an office building I had helped design. The article mentioned his founding vision, his relentless drive, his singular genius. It did not mention me. It did not mention the 15 years of partnership that had preceded his sole ownership. The erasure was complete. The sale nearly destroyed my plan. If the patent transferred to the acquiring company before they discovered the ownership issue, I would lose my leverage entirely. The acquiring firm would have resources I could never match, legal teams that could bury me in motions and appeals until I ran out of money or will. I spent 3 days running scenarios, calculating outcomes, trying to decide if I should act or wait. Diane made the decision simple. "You file now," she said, "or you lose the only card you have." I filed a quiet cease and desist through Diane, notifying the acquiring firm that they had purchased technology they did not legally own. The letter was precise, clinical, and backed by documentation that proved the patent had reverted to me 18 months before the sale. We sent it on a Friday afternoon, time to arrive after markets closed. The deal stalled. Marcus scrambled. I stayed silent. The acquiring firm conducted an emergency audit. Their lawyers pulled every document related to the patent, examined the original incorporation agreements, and found the reversion clause buried in the boilerplate. I imagine the phone calls that followed, the rage, the disbelief, the accusations of negligence. Marcus would have assured them it was a misunderstanding, a clerical error, something he could fix with a signature and a wire transfer. But he could not fix it. The patent was mine, and no amount of pressure or payment could change that without my consent. 2 weeks later, the acquiring firm withdrew their offer. The announcement was brief, citing due diligence concerns. The trade press speculated about hidden liabilities and accounting irregularities. None of them guessed the truth. Marcus was left with a company in chaos, investors demanding explanations, and a legal mess that cost him millions in emergency settlements just to keep the doors open. I read about each development in the same trade journals that had celebrated his rise. The company laid off 30% of its staff. The board replaced 2 executives. The valuation dropped from $140 million to $60 million in a single quarter. Analysts downgraded their recommendations. Partners terminated contracts. The slow, methodical collapse I had prepared for was unfolding exactly as I had imagined, and I felt nothing watching it happen. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just the quiet confirmation that systems, when properly understood, produce predictable outcomes. He rebuilt. I will give him that. Marcus is nothing if not resilient. He pivoted the company into a new sector, raised emergency funding from a desperate venture group, and launched a product that did not depend on my patent. It failed quietly 2 years later. I read about the dissolution in a trade journal that devoted 3 paragraphs to what had once been the most promising startup in the region. Marcus disappeared from the industry. I heard through former colleagues that he was consulting, that he had moved to another state, that his marriage had ended. I felt nothing hearing this. Satisfaction is a cheap replacement for justice. Then came the email. Helix Dynamic Systems was Marcus's second act. He had found new investors, built a new team, and developed a new product in the same sector I had pioneered 15 years earlier. The product was clever. It solved problems my old patent had only partially addressed, but it could not launch without licensing the foundational technology that my patent still covered. The email offered $200,000 for full assignment of the patent. It was phrased as a standard acquisition, routed through lawyers to conceal desperation. But I had spent 6 years learning to read documents the way predators read movement. The offer was urgent, because Marcus had promised his investors a product launch in 90 days. Without my patent, he had nothing to ship. I drafted a response declining the offer and sent it before breakfast. 3 days later, a revised offer arrived, $400,000 plus equity in Helix. I declined again. A week after that, Marcus himself called my phone. I did not recognize the number, but I recognized his voice the moment he spoke. "We need to talk," he said. "No," I said, and ended the call. His lawyer sent a letter threatening litigation, claiming I was engaging in patent trolling and unlawful interference with commerce. Diane reviewed it and called it noise. "Let him file," she said. "Discovery will be spectacular." Marcus did not file. Instead, he began calling my phone daily, leaving messages that shifted from professional courtesy to barely concealed panic. His launch date was approaching. His investors were asking questions. His entire second act hinged on technology he could not access, because 6 years ago he had gotten greedy and sloppy. I listened to every voicemail once, then deleted it. The complication I had not anticipated came from his investors. 2 of them reached out, directly, offering to negotiate around Marcus. They wanted the patent at any cost, and they were prepared to replace him as CEO if necessary. The amounts they proposed climbed into 7 figures. I realized, slowly, that I held more power than I had understood. But I did not want money. I wanted something Marcus could not purchase and could not fake. I scheduled a meeting with him, not at his office or mine. A neutral place, a coffee shop equidistant between his new headquarters and my apartment. I chose a chain location, anonymous and forgettable, where neither of us had history. I arrived early and chose a table by the window, positioning myself so I could see the door. When Marcus walked in, I barely recognized him. He had aged in visible ways, thinner, grayer, moving with a caution that had not been there before. His suit was expensive but hung loose on his frame. His eyes, which had always carried a particular brightness, looked dull and exhausted. He saw me and hesitated for just a moment before crossing the room. He sat across from me without ordering anything and folded his hands on the table. The hands were steady, but I noticed the slight tremor in his left thumb, pressing against the knuckle of his right hand as if to still it. "Thank you for meeting," he said. I nodded. "I know you are angry," he said. "I know I hurt you. But this is business. We can both win here." "Tell me what happened," I said. He blinked. "What do you mean?" 6 years ago. Why did you do it?" Marcus looked at the window. Traffic moved past in the late afternoon sun. A woman walked by with a stroller. He watched her pass before speaking again, and when he did, his voice had flattened into something rehearsed. "You were slowing us down. Every decision took forever. Investors wanted speed and you wanted process. I needed room to move. So you framed me." "I protected the company," he said. "I did what was necessary." "You fabricated evidence. You bribed witnesses. You destroyed my reputation." "I gave you a severance," he said, his voice tightening. "I could have left you with nothing." "You left me with nothing," I said. "The severance was contingent on a non-compete that made me unemployable in my own field for 3 years. You knew that. You structured it that way." Marcus leaned back. "We are not here to relitigate the past." "No," I said. "We are here because you need something from me, and I want to understand what kind of man asks for help from someone he destroyed." He stared at me for a long moment. Then, something in his face shifted, the rehearsed calm cracking just enough to show the calculation beneath. "What do you want?" he asked. "Name your price." "I want you to tell the truth," I said. He frowned. "About what?" "About what you did. To the investors, to the employees, to everyone who believed your version of events." "That's insane." "Then you do not get the patent." Marcus's hands tightened against each other. "You will. Kill the company. My investors will lose everything." "Your investors backed a thief," I said. "That was their mistake. You are destroying something good out of spite." "No," I said. "I am deciding what my work is worth, and it is not worth saving your reputation." He stood up, the chair scraping backward hard enough that people at nearby tables looked over. Marcus steadied himself, his face pale and rigid. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You think you hold all the cards, but you are wrong. I will bury you in litigation. I will make this so expensive and so painful that you will beg me to settle." "Try," I said. He left without another word, the door swinging shut behind him with a pneumatic hiss. I sat at the table for another 20 minutes, watching the street and drinking coffee that had gone cold. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. I felt, for the first time in 6 years, completely certain of the path I had chosen. 2 days later, his lawyer sent a one-line email withdrawing all offers and threatening a lawsuit that never materialized. I forwarded the email to Diane and returned to my ordinary routines. The turn came 6 weeks later. Marcus resigned from Helix. The announcement was brief and cited personal reasons. The company's social media accounts posted a generic farewell message thanking him for his vision and dedication. There were no details, no explanation, just the clean corporate erasure of a founder who had become a liability. The same day, I received a call from the board chair, a woman named Angela Chen, who introduced herself as a longtime admirer of my original work. She had researched the patent dispute, she said, and understood the full history. She wanted to know if I would consider a conversation about the company's future. We met at her office, a corner suite in a downtown high-rise with windows overlooking the harbor. Angela was in her 50s, precise in speech and movement, the kind of executive who had built credibility through decades of delivering results. She offered me coffee and got directly to the point. "We are in a difficult position," she said. "Our product depends on your patent. Our investors are concerned. Our engineers are demoralized. We need a path forward that works for everyone." "What do you want from me?" I asked. "We want to license the patent on fair terms. We want you to join as a technical advisor with an equity stake, and we want your help rebuilding trust with the team Marcus has left behind. I asked to see the proposed terms. Angela handed me a folder containing a licensing agreement, an advisory contract, and an equity grant. I read through each document carefully, noting the clauses that mattered and the ones that did not. The license was non-exclusive, meaning I retained ownership and could license to others. The advisory role was structured as independent consultation, 40 hours per month at a rate that reflected my actual worth. The equity was meaningful, not symbolic. "This is fair," I said. "We believe in fair," Angela said. Marcus believed in winning at any cost. That approach has its limits. I negotiated terms over 3 weeks. Diane reviewed every clause, flagged potential issues, and suggested modifications that strengthened my position without killing the deal. Angela's team responded professionally, compromising where reasonable and holding firm where necessary. The process felt adult in a way that my previous partnership with Marcus never had. The final agreement preserved my ownership of the patent while giving Helix a 20-year license with renewal options. I would advise on technical architecture, product security, and strategic positioning. I would attend quarterly board meetings and have input on major decisions. The equity would vest over 4 years, incentivizing my continued involvement. I signed the documents on a Thursday morning in Angela's office. She signed immediately after, then extended her hand across the desk. "Welcome to Helix," she said. "The deal was fair, more than fair. It compensated me for 6 years of exile and gave me control over how my technology would be used going forward. Helix launched on schedule with my patent integrated properly, and the product succeeded in ways Marcus's version never could have." The company secured Series C funding 3 months later at a valuation that restored investor confidence. Trade journals covered the launch with enthusiasm, praising the technical innovation and execution. But Angela had one more question before we finalized the agreement. We were sitting in her office on a Friday afternoon, the contract signed but not yet filed, when she set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Did Marcus send the statement?" she asked. "No," I said. "Do you want us to require it as a condition of the deal?" I thought about this. I thought about the written confession I had demanded, the public correction, the restoration of my name. I thought about how much those things had mattered when I sat across from Marcus in that coffee shop and laid out my terms. I thought about what justice meant and whether it required his humiliation or just my freedom. "No," I said. "Let it go." She paused, studying my face. "May I ask why?" "Because requiring it means I still need his approval," I said. "I do not." Angela nodded slowly. "That's the right answer," she said, "but it is a hard one to reach." "It took 6 years," I said. "The aftermath is quiet. I still live in the small apartment, though I could afford more now. The lease renews automatically each year, and I have not considered moving. The space fits my needs. The kitchen table where I assembled my case against Marcus still holds my morning coffee. The walls where I taped timelines and documents are blank again, painted over by maintenance when I finally took everything down. I still walk 2 miles every morning. The route has not changed. I pass the same houses, the same intersections, the same coffee shop where I met Marcus for the last time. I do not avoid these places. They are ordinary again, stripped of the weight I once attached to them. I consult for Helix 2 days a week, usually Tuesdays and Thursdays. The work is good, the team is talented and hungry, and they treat me with a respect I have earned rather than inherited. I review architectural decisions, audit security protocols, and advise on partnerships that carry technical risk. Angela listens when I raise concerns. The board asks questions that demonstrate they have read my reports. The company functions the way I always believed companies should, with competence, accountability, and minimal drama. The rest of my time belongs to a new project I am building alone. It is early, just a prototype and some promising results, but it feels like mine in a way nothing has since graduate school. I work slowly, without investors or partners or anyone who might confuse trust with permission to take. I document every decision. I file every patent application under my name alone. I learned through pain that ownership is not about control, but about clarity regarding who built what. Marcus sends me an email once a year around the anniversary of his resignation. The messages are short and formal, thanking me for the opportunity to work together, wishing me well, sometimes mentioning a book he thinks I might enjoy or an article relevant to my field. The tone is cordial, almost friendly, as if we are old colleagues who drifted apart naturally rather than enemies who destroyed each other. I do not reply. I do not delete them either. They sit in a folder I never open, evidence of nothing that matters anymore. I used to read them carefully, looking for hidden meanings or veiled threats. Now I simply archive them and move on. He has become background noise, a person who existed in my past, but holds no claim on my present. Priya, the engineer who gave me the thumb drive, reached out last year. She had left the industry after Marcus's company collapsed, burned out by the chaos and betrayal. But she was thinking about returning, she said, and wanted advice. We met for coffee and talked for 2 hours about work-life balance, technical debt, and how to spot leaders who value people over performance metrics. At the end, she asked if I had forgiven Marcus. I have not thought about it that way, I said. What way have you thought about it? Forgiveness assumes he matters enough to withhold or grant something. He does not. She smiled at that. You sound free, she said. I considered this. Free is not a word I would have chosen, but it is accurate. I sleep now. Not every night, but most. I sleep deeply, without the 3 a.m. wake-ups that marked the first years after my termination. I wake to daylight and the sound of traffic and the ordinary problems of a life rebuilt from discipline and patience. When I do wake at 2 in the morning, I make coffee and sit in the study and plan the next thing I will build. I sketch architectures on graph paper. I test edge cases in my head. I think through failure modes and redundancies and what it would take to make something elegant and resilient. The difference now is that I am building for myself, not for investors, not for partners, not for anyone who might decide 6 or 10 or 15 years from now that they deserve what I made more than I do. I have learned that justice is not punishment, it is clarity. It is the refusal to let other people's betrayals define the boundaries of your life. It is the patient work of building again, stronger and quieter and entirely on your own terms. Marcus took everything I owned, but he did not take the one thing that mattered, the knowledge of how to build. That, it turns out, was the only thing I needed to keep safe. Everything else was replaceable. I think about this sometimes on my morning walks, when the light is slanting across the street and the air is cool and the world feels calibrated for fresh starts. I think about the man I was before Marcus's betrayal, confident and trusting and a little naive about what friendship costs. I do not miss that man. He built good things, but he built them on assumptions that could not hold weight. The man I am now builds differently, slower, with eyes open and foundations checked, alone when necessary, in partnership when safe, always with the understanding that what you make yourself, you can never lose. That knowledge, quiet and hard-earned, is worth more than everything Marcus took. It is the patent he could never steal, and I will carry it carefully and without sentiment into whatever I build next.